Hey guys, in this video we're going over a few exercises to get stronger and more flexible shoulders. So I'm going to assume that you already do whole body CARs, but just in case you don't, just make sure you're doing shoulder, neck and scapular CARs before you do these other exercises. I will link a few videos in the description below so you can check those tutorials out if you haven't yet. So the first set of exercises is using a band to do shoulder disconnects. You can use a dowel rod or a light pole if you want to. I didn't have one, so I used an exercise band, but I do find if you're beginning with this is helpful because it is a little bit more forgiving. You can bend it and stretch it, and you can go a little bit wider or narrower if you're working on getting narrower without having the constant tension of the pole. The pole, however, does help a little bit with adding stability, but this is one thing that the band is good at. It exposes all the areas that are uneven. So if you want, you can record yourself doing these and then watch if one shoulder is, say, maybe a little bit different than the other, which you wouldn't be able to see with a PVC pipe. So the first set of exercises is sitting down. You can stand up if you want, if you find that uncomfortable. And the main purpose is to push your ribs down and learn how to use your shoulders without rib flaring. The second variation is with your head on the ground, facing the ground. And this way, you push your ribs down and you don't have as much of a chance to rib flare. So it's easier to feel the ground as a bit of feedback so that you know when you are starting to try to compensate with your ribs instead of using the full range of motion that your shoulders have.
Best thing to do is to start with your arms wide, and when you get an idea of where your limitations are, you can start working on going closer and closer. I would also recommend testing out the difference that you feel with a straight pole or a band, because you might find the difference is quite intense and maybe you are actually compensating with the band more than you may think. That's why also recording yourself is really handy. One of my absolute favorite exercises is using a dowel rod with a little weight put in the middle to start working on strength at end range. Unfortunately, I don't have a dowel rod, so I tried it with the band. It is a little bit more wobbly, but that actually, if anything, adds a bit more stability work into it. I would say it's much easier to control with a pole. So the next step is obviously adding a weight and starting to very slowly start controlling this movement with weight. Here I am using 0.5 kilograms, and once you get a little bit better with 1 or 2 kilos, that's when you can start loading up more and more gradually.
So the second set of exercises is where we're laying face down on the ground and we're working in a W position, working shoulder external rotation. I kind of made it more obvious than you necessarily have to, but I made a point to lift the fists first. So your hands end up externally rotating up, and that brings the rear delts into action. Then we're lifting the elbows, continuing to maintain the hands being higher than the elbows, and then we reach overhead, aiming to get overhead with a nice locked out elbow, again keeping the hands higher than your elbows.
So step 1 is to bring the hands up while the elbows are still on the floor. Then the elbows come up and the hands are still higher than the elbows. Then we reach overhead with hands as high as physically possible. Say your neck muscles are kicking in more than you'd like to, you can rest your head on something like a bench in a hip hinge position and do the exact same movement, again reminding yourself to keep your hands as high as possible, and this should restrict the neck getting involved. In case you didn't find that hard enough, you can also do this movement with weights. In case you want to also do the first variation with your hands coming up and your elbows going to the ground, that's also fine. It just depends what stage you're at. This will probably be a little bit easier if you're just transitioning first time into weights, and then when this becomes easier, you can start adding in, bringing the elbows down and rotating the hands as well. At this point, you may be wondering why we're focusing on shoulder external rotation so much.
The reason this is important is because a lot of us don't use shoulder external rotation, and when we're in certain positions, we tend to compensate and let the shoulders droop forward, sort of roll forward, and then we start compensating and wonder why we end up with shoulder issues and neck pains. So this is a good drill to learn how to always keep your shoulders in a good position for movements. The third exercise is one of my favorites. It's using a bench, but you could probably do this at slightly different angles as well. But you are allowing your arms to completely relax and your scapula to relax. Then you can bring your scapula back and together, and then you row. So the difference is, instead of just doing a normal row where you're not thinking too much of your scapular position, the scapular movement is the first part of the lift, and then you row. So every single rep you repeat this, your scapula should by the end get rather tired, and in the future any other row that you are doing should be easier to control your scapula in this movement rather than ending up with any kind of bad positioning of your scapula and of course injury when you are doing other things.
So this specific exercise is one of my favorites because you've got the bench to relax on and you can let your arms really droop, your scapula really open up, and then retract them and row. So you really feel the difference in the positions of your scapula. But there's nothing to say that you can't do this with every single other row. So you can do this with a bent over row, you can do this with a pull-up. There's really no limits. The point is you can focus on your scapular positioning.
Thank you for watching, guys. If you found that useful, please subscribe and head over to our website to get a free ebook of our methods.